Lialsan Manyawu Kechamalea, Inenenchi Mampotawane Waluturia. So today is January 18th. So I want to talk a bit about the Maaso Kova Pahko, which is the deer head ceremony. So today is when many celebrate the Maaso Kova Pahko, the deer head ceremony, which is a night whose meaning can be separated from the long and brutal history of Yaqui people. In the glow of candles, a sacred Maso Kova, meaning deer head, rests on an altar dressed with flowers and light. The ceremony unfolds as both a memorial to our ancestors and a declaration that our culture has survived everything that has tried to erase it. For centuries, Yoeme have lived along the Rio Yaqui and Sonora. From the earliest Spanish invasions in 1533, Yaqui warriors defended our land and rejected outside domination. This independence continued into the 18th century when Yaquis and our Mayo relatives rose in the Great Revolt of 1740, the first of many uprisings across the next 100 years. When Mexico declared independence in 1821, Yaquis had hoped for peace, but quickly learned that the new government sought to dismantle our lands and force us into the national project. For us, this was not only an attack on our political sovereignty, but a spiritual assault on the land that held the presence of our ancestors, our stories, and our creation itself. And every stretch of the Rio Yaqui, every hill, and especially the sacred Bacatete range, carried sacred meaning, and losing this land meant losing part of the soul of the people. This is why the conflict continued for over a century, and why each new attempt by the Mexican state to take Yaqui land was met with renewed resistance. By the late 19th century, under the Porfiriato of President Porfirio Diaz, the violence against the Yaqui reached its horrific peak. Yaqui land was coveted for railroads, mines, and agriculture, and Diaz's government spoke openly about removing Yaquis entirely. Still, Yaqui resistance under leaders like Cajame in the 1870s and the 1880s held the line for as long as possible. Even after Cajame was executed in 1887, resistance continued under Tetabiate, who retreated into the mountains with his people rather than submit. It was in those same mountains that the tragedy of Maso Kova occurred. On January 18th in 1900, Mexican troops under General Lorenzo Torres discovered a large group of Yaqui families in a canyon called Maso Kova, Deerhead. At dawn, they had attacked. Yaquis were low on ammunition, and with nowhere to run, they fought fiercely from the canyon walls. When the day ended, nearly 400 Yaqui men, women, and children were dead. Many, cornered at the cliff edge, chose to jump rather than be taken, and around 1,000 survivors were captured. The massacre opened the door to one of the darkest chapters in Yaqui history. In the years that followed, thousands of Yaquis were deported and enslaved in distant plantations in the Yucatan and Oaxaca. Entire families were ripped from the valley. Many died of disease, abuse, and overwork. The homeland was handed to settlers, and the deliberate attempt at cultural extermination, an effort to scatter the Yaquis so widely that we could never again defend the Rio Yaqui. Yet, even in this devastation, some escaped to southern Arizona and built new communities in places like Tucson and Guadalupe. These exiles carried language, ceremony, and memory with them. And by the early 1900s, one once populous Yaqui nation had been reduced from around 20,000 people to fewer than maybe about 10,000. And it was a near fatal blow, but it did not distinguish the Yaqui spirit. Resistance continued sporadically even after Maso Kova, and the last of the armed uprisings did not end until around 1927. And despite the violence, Yaquis maintained a world rich with spiritual depth. Our cosmology recognized multiple enchanted realms intertwined with the physical world, especially the Sewania, our flower world, and which is a place of beauty, song, and spirit. Flowers embodied the soul, and the ceremony became the bridge between worlds. Land in this worldview was sacred, and to lose it was to rupture the bond between the living and our ancestors. Even so, Yaquis adapted to the presence of Catholicism, weaving saints and Christian observances into an indigenous framework without abandoning our own beliefs. The ceremonial calendar has grown to maybe nearly 200 rituals a year, all punctuated with Yaqui songs, dancers, and offerings. This ceremonial life has become central to survival, binding communities together in both Sonora and here in Arizona. And at the heart of many ceremonies is the deer, Itomsaila Maso, whose dance bridges the human world and the Sewanya, our flower world. According to tradition, a hunter once saw a deer dancing in their own way and carried the songs home. The deer dance is therefore both a gift and a remembrance of the deer's willingness to sustain the people. The dancer prepares with care cocoon rattles tied to his legs, a belt of deer hooves at his waist, gourd rattles in his hand, and a white cloth hiding his face. On top of his head rests the Maso Kova, wrapped with red ribbons representing flowers. Once the dancer dons the deer head, he becomes the deer itself. His movements are quick, alert, and graceful, which echo the life of a deer itself. And around him, deer singers play the water drum, rasp, and other instruments, producing sounds said to be the heartbeat and breath of the deer. Pascola dancers move with humor and energy, balancing the sacred presence with the human world. All of these threads come together in the Maaso Kova Pahko every January 18th, especially in Pascua Pueblo outside of Tucson. Yaqui families gather to remember the massacre. As night falls, a cross is decorated with flowers and palms stand in the plaza, and an altar is prepared with candles, often hundreds sometimes, and lit to represent those who had passed away. Prayer leaders begin the ceremony, their voices joined by the cantoras, whose hymns carry grief and hope. These prayers invite the spirits of the dead to be present, and on this night, the boundary between the worlds feel thin. The deer dance begins with solemnity. The deer dancer crouches low, the antlers outlined by firelight. The pascolas move respectfully through their usual playfulness subdued by the weight of the occasion. And elders often cry softly as memories told by parents and grandparents and great grandparents rise with the music. To them, watching the deer dancer on this night is a form of healing and a way of acknowledging the suffering of their families and the resilience that allowed them to stand in the present. As the ceremony unfolds, certain moments are dedicated to naming victims whose names have survived through oral histories, while others are set aside for silent prayer for all who died at Maso Kova. Offerings of beans, corns, squash are placed at the altar, and elders drive small wooden crosses into the earth, each one symbolizing a relative loss. The songs carry the community through waves of mourning and comfort, and generations experience the ceremony differently. Elders feel the history directly, adults carry the responsibility of organizing and preserving the event, and children first see the spectacle before understanding its meaning, and as they grow older, they eventually realize that the ceremony is an act of remembrance and survival. And teenagers often participate by helping carry candles or flowers, and many eventually join the ceremonial societies, like becoming deer dancers or cantoras or regular deer singers or pascolas. And when the ceremony concludes, the deer dancer lays the head back on the altar, returning it to the spiritual realm. Closing prayers or hymns may seal the night, and people step forward to touch the deer head or the cross before embracing one another. And the ceremony is cathartic. It allows communities to mourn, to find strength together, and to affirm that our story did not end in 1900. The journey of the Maso Kova itself adds an even deeper layer. A ceremonial deer head once used in Yaqui rituals was taken back in the 1930s by Scandinavian anthropologists Bodil and Hagen Christensen and placed in the Museum of Ethnography in Sweden. For decades, it sat behind glass, treated as a curiosity. In 2003, Andrea Carmen, a Yaqui woman and director of the International Indian Treaty Council, discovered it there and began the long process of bringing it home. And after 19 years of negotiations supported by Yaqui leaders in both Arizona and Sonora, and as well as the Sami people of Sweden and the United Nations bodies, the museum finally agreed to return it. And in 2022, the Maso Kova came home, not as an artifact but as a living being, returned to the traditional authorities with the commitment that it would never again be placed in a museum. Today, the deer head ceremony stands as a reminder that all Yaquis have faced slaughter, enslavement, and exile in an attempted cultural destruction, and yet it also shows the strength and the continuity of the people. The ceremonies have survived in whispers during the hardest years, returned openly in Arizona's communities, and were also passed from one generation to the next through devotion and memory. The Maaso Kova Pahko is one of the first ceremonies of the year, signifying that remembrance is the foundation of the Yaqui calendar and the soul of the nation. As the deer song fades into the night and the last candle burns low, the truth remains that us Yaquis remember what happened at Maso Kova, not through monuments or textbooks, but through ceremony, song, dance, and the presence of the deer whose steps carry history forward. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much for watching this video and learning a little bit of Yaqui history. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I hope to see you again. Chukula in Lios Apuenchimak.